Welcome back to Buckeye Talk, and welcome back to Buckeye Talk for Tyler Shoemaker, our first 2023 season edition with Tyler, who you all know, I hope, from listening to Betting the Buckeyes with he and Doug throughout the season. But he's been our resident odds maker here on Buckeye Talk going on a few years now. Tyler, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, great to be back. First time this year, I guess, because the last show we did was right before the Peach Bowl, New Year's Eve. So first time this year, so it's good to be back.
All right, so yeah, it would even be first time this calendar year. I was just thinking for this season, but yeah, that makes sense that we haven't heard from you in a while, but we sought you out because you just dropped, as you do throughout the season, and you become a must follow for I think a lot of fans of Ohio State who've gotten to know you. But you just dropped your 2023 rankings, your ratings, however you want to call that. I suppose I should defer to what you call them, but you actually this year called it the index, the tissue index, kind of. Has there been a change in what you're doing, or some adjustment to what you're doing? And if so, what's different?
Yeah. So the first thing you said, so I did give my numbers a name, where it's the Tissue Index, TSI. It's just so much easier than constantly saying like, well, my numbers think, or my model says, or it gets exhausting saying that over and
Sure.
over. So having TSI to just reference, real quick makes it nice. But in terms of differences, I am really excited about my ability, or what I perceive to be my ability, to quantify and reward and penalize teams that really develop their talent well and teams that don't develop their talent well. Because a lot of times with these preseason ratings, a lot of it, so much of it is your recruiting ranking and the talent you have on your team. But I really spent a lot of time thinking about, I need to figure out how I can reward, the Illinois, the Iowas, the Minnesotas, those type of teams that don't recruit at a super high level, but constantly are winning 7, 8 games, and figure out how to quantify that. And I think I've done a good job of that this offseason. We'll see how it works out, but I am excited about the numbers.
Interesting. So, because I've always been sort of fascinated by that, like guys like you, what sort of tweaks are you making without getting too far into the proprietary part of this algorithm, because it is what you use to put out your picks and things each week. And I would definitely advise people to come back now that especially gambling is legal in Ohio. If you can uh, partake in that on a recreational basis, and you're interested in it, then Tyler's a good guy to follow. I did very well in my NFL pool last year. That was solely the before it was the TSI. I was just riding the TSI, and it worked out well for me in my meager pools that I do. So what goes into the numbers that you just put out, like from a basic standpoint? I don't want somebody to be able to reverse engineer it, but what are you looking at
Sure.
when you come up with these numbers, especially these preseason numbers that then over the course of the season get kind of baked at, or get kind of whittled out as you're getting
Yep.
new data?
Yeah. So the preseason numbers are a combination of your 4 year weighted recruiting average, which I assign the weights. That's kind of my proprietary thing. I do reference the 247 composite. So that's kind of my baseline for my talent ranking. But then I put my own weight, assign my own weight to each class, how I think that is going to play out in terms of performance on the field. And then the other component that I really look at, that I spent a ton of time really evaluating my process with this offseason, is how you've done in recent years. It's hard because 2020 is kind of in there recently, and that was, so honestly, I threw 2020 out. The data was just too jacked
For
up. Like,
everybody.
yeah, I mean,
Yep.
that's the thing. When I did my, because I've done my historical ratings now going back to 2013, and when I was looking at, like, when I was doing my 2020 ratings again, like BYU was like number 2. But then I looked at like FEI and SP Plus, and like they've got Buffalo, and Miami of Ohio up there. So I don't feel bad, but I had to throw the data out because that's not going to inform anything for 2023. So I basically looked at 2019, 21, and 2022. But beyond that, really focusing on, okay, what type of continuity has this program had, and how has that correlated with their power rating in each given year, and then kind of used, created a formula there, and then used that in conjunction with their 2023 weighted talent score to come up with their 2023 rating.
So the reason we wanted you to come on was mostly to talk about what all these numbers are going to mean for Ohio State. What your numbers say about Ohio State and how they got to that number, and what you as an Ohio State fan think of that number, because you're both. You're looking at it cold hard facts, and sometimes those cold hard facts just stab you right through your scarlet and gray heart. So we're going to talk a lot about Ohio State, and then that's going to be like first segment, what we're doing right now. Second segment, kind of keep holding back the juicy tidbit of what your prediction models are saying right now about the Ohio State Michigan game, because I'm very intrigued by that. And then we'll talk about the Brian Ferentz score watch and a number of other things around the Big Ten and nationally. We'll kind of wrap up at the end with that because I think there's some interesting numbers there. But let's just start off with the basic numbers. You have a power ranking, and there's all those things you were just talking about that go into making that. Your power ranking right now has Georgia number one, and actually by a pretty comfortable margin, with a score of 30.3. Ohio State number two, 26.0. Then Alabama 24.2 and Michigan 23.9. And then a little bit of a gap down to the USC Texas level, and then some more gaps that kind of cascade down from there. But when you put the numbers in and that's what it spits out to you, was this about what you thought the preseason top four was supposed to look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think the top four is pretty unanimous in some order at this point when you're looking at any type of model like mine. I will say I had to I did like a preliminary ratings, I think back in April maybe. Um and I had Ohio State ahead of Michigan then, and I was like, is that right? Like am I is there something in there that I'm just like overlooking or whatever? Because I really wanted to give Michigan the benefit of the doubt based on how the last 2 years have gone, and Ohio State's losing C.J. Stroud among others. So I spent a ton of time like really studying both teams and looking at all the factors I mentioned earlier, and it still shook out to Ohio State being, I've got them 2 points ahead of Michigan right now, and basically 2 points ahead of Alabama as well. So I feel good about it. Georgia as a clear number one was a no brainer. I mean, no matter how you slice it, that's how it came out. So I think the top four is pretty unanimous.
So we'll talk more about Michigan in a few minutes, but I want to zero in on what your numbers are telling you about Ohio State. You have them, as I said, number two overall, but tied with USC as the top offense in the country coming into the year. 45.2 is the rating there. And as an Ohio State fan, you are obviously well aware that they don't know who the quarterback is yet, or haven't named a quarterback, and the offensive line is what it is. It's some questions left to be answered, I guess we'll say, on the offensive line, and things like running back. There's both positives and potential negatives there, I suppose. Why does your system, do you think, still have Ohio State rated so highly, especially when you can't assume anything about the quarterback yet, and those other questions that I just mentioned?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question, and I will admit the when you so I feel really good about my power ratings. When you break it down further into the subcategories of offense and defense, I will say that's less in stone in my mind because I kind of you would think I do an offensive rating and then do a defensive rating and then put those together and that's the power rating, but I actually do it backwards of that. I actually come up with the team holistic power rating, and then I look at how those teams' power ratings have correlated with their offense and defense, in recent
Oh.
years, like I mentioned, and kind of reverse engineer it that way. So to answer your question, it's just a lot of benefit of the doubt based on what they've done offensively consistently under Ryan Day.
And even if you're looking at things like recruiting rankings, I would imagine there may not be an abundance of programs out there that have two quarterbacks in their room right now that are ranked as high as Kyle McCord and Devin Brown.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing. Like even if you wanted to take it a step further into okay, well, how have they recruited? At that position, it's like okay, well, they've got two studs, so generally those guys would, on paper, doing an exercise like this would project to be really good. So you factor that, or you couple that with the fact that Ohio State's offense has been basically, I think, number one in my ratings for the last few years. Um, in conjunction with, I do, like I said, I do look at the head coach. I don't just look at, oh well, this team has been good for a few years. Like if Oklahoma lost Lincoln Riley, and then last year they were terrible. So like you have to obviously factor those sorts of things in. But Ryan Day's offense has kind of earned the benefit of the doubt, even within the numbers.
We'll come back to head coach talk a little bit more in that third segment that I was talking about. But speaking of coaches, one of the things that has changed with Ohio State is obviously a new offensive coordinator, Brian Hartline, being elevated to that position. And we don't yet know what that's going to mean as far as his play calling duties yet. That hasn't been established in stone, I suppose you would say. But if you're making preseason picks um, just a casual gambler or someone who's interested in this, or not casual, but even at your level, are you paying attention to things that are that granular and how it might affect the team for season? If you're going to if you're betting on a win total, if you're betting on things like that, are you looking at things down to that minute of a level, or because that's going to be a hard thing to quantify in the numbers you're doing, are you inclined to set that aside because it maybe doesn't make that much of a difference?
That's a good question, and I look at those type of things similar to how we've talked in the past about, like, when a player misses a game, do I adjust my rating for that game? It's kind of the same concept. So there are very few coaches or coordinators that would make me move the needle, but it's more in those situations. It's more about like the handicap versus the like number projection. It's like how, like, okay, the numbers tell me this, and I know that this guy's a bad coordinator or a good coordinator, whatever. That may sway me one way or the other, or confirm what the numbers say, or if it's contradictory to what the numbers say, it's something I may just stay away from.
Did you have to think about that as you're setting numbers this year? Because it may not be Ryan Day calling the plays, and some of what you do is based on what Ohio State's offense has historically done with Ryan Day calling the plays.
I did not, because like you said, that's hard to quantify. However, because college football is so nuanced and there is such turnover with coaches and with rosters, um, I am much quicker to adapt to what's happening on the field than I think a lot of models are. Like I know Bill Connolly with SP Plus has just flat out said, like, he uses his preseason numbers included with the on-field stuff pretty much the whole season. And I think I generally am going to have mine completely phased out to on-field performance by week 6 or so.
I assume that's something that's changed over time for you. Have you found it to be more accurate as the years have gone on, as you've
Yeah,
leaned into that more?
yeah, definitely. And I mean, bowl, even bowl season last season was really good. I think the only like late season week that I think really killed, rivalry week last year, was pretty rough on me. But otherwise, the second half of the season, I found a lot of edges because my numbers had adjusted to, like a Kansas or something like that, that is doing more, more or less on the field than was previously projected, and I'm just a little faster to adapt to those things.
So with a score like this for Ohio State, because I kind of want to, I want to use your way of looking at the game to help people maybe find a new perspective on how to look at this team as they're getting ready for the season. So this kind of an offensive score for Ohio State, is that a reflection more of production last season, even if Stroud isn't coming back, or is it a largely a product of a recruiting ranking that is very lofty year by year, and especially is propped up by what they do recruiting receivers year after year?
Both. Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. It's both. It's a combination of their recruiting plus what they've done on the field in terms of just scoring a million points a game the last few years.
Do you have to think about that too as you're setting this number? Like, Ohio State's got this great offensive recruiting score probably by your system. But if X number of that, X percentage of that is at the same position, only three of those guys can be out there at any given time, or four if Steven begs them enough. Do you have to back off of what you're predicting for Ohio State there?
It wouldn't change the number. Again, I do, it's hard. I'm being a one man operation. It's hard to get that nitty gritty with, because I do numbers for all 133 FBS teams. So
Mm-hmm.
it would be hard to get that nitty gritty with every team. Now, being as close to Ohio State as I am, I do have that nuance, thanks to you guys that I listen to every day. I do have that nuanced understanding of how the offense is going to work. So again, it's something I keep in mind, if I'm like going to bet an over or something like that, especially early in the season, but it wouldn't necessarily affect the number that I'm putting out.
Gotcha. We should say, for people who are watching on YouTube, they can see the Twitter handle over your head. But for those who are listening to us, at Buckeye Tie 23, BUCKEYETY 23, that's where you can find these preseason ratings. You put them out for free. There's just a link to a Google spreadsheet so people can see all how many 130. How many is it now? 132.
133 now. Two more joined
133.
this year.
133. Jeez. 133 teams, and you've got ratings for all of them. You've got schedule breakdowns for all of them. You've got over under calculations for all of them. It's a lot of work that you put in. So Ohio State number 1 in the country in offense, as we already said. Number 15 in defense, which on its face seems good, or at least okay. Like it's definitely better than what they have been at the end of a year defensively from the numbers in recent years. But at the same time, it's sixth best in the Big Ten. I actually had this wrong when I first texted about it. I think I said fourth best. It's actually sixth best among Big Ten teams in your preseason rankings. And I'm curious how. Let's talk first, I guess. Just do you look at that and say that's a good number? Maybe especially relative to what they have offensively, that they don't have to be as good, I guess, defensively, and that's how you end up with a lofty overall score. And is it hard? I guess, I mean, you can look at it even through the eyes of a Ohio State fan and say, I'm intrigued that the numbers say the defense could be that good.
I think it's a good number. I think, especially to start this season, considering in their two biggest games last year, they kind of fell on their face a little bit defensively. I think going into this season with the defensive rating of 19.3, which just so you guys have an understanding, basically my defensive rating is, I tried to make it as simple as possible to understand. So it's basically how many points would you be expected to give up against an average FBS team. So for right now, I think East Carolina is like right at average, which Michigan coincidentally plays. So Ohio State would be expected to give up 19 points to East Carolina. So, that, to put that into context. But no, I think it's a good number to start with. I am pretty optimistic that that's going to come down, that the ranking will go up, but the rating will go down, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That the defense will be better, that the numbers will view the defense better as the season progresses.
Now, obviously, as you said before, you base a lot of these numbers on the production from last year and recruiting rankings, things like that. But Ohio State made a huge impact through the portal on defense specifically in the offseason, whether it's Davison Igbinosun, Jihad Carter, Taiwan Malone, um, even Lorenzo Styles Jr. We don't know yet how much he will play right away as a guy converting, changing positions to corner. But then you've also got, your CJ Hickses and your Sonny Styles, and I guess those are going to show up in the recruiting rankings, so they'll be represented there. But as for the transfer portal, um, is there any way, are you able to factor that into these updated rankings, or is that something that more gets folded in as the season starts going and the past numbers get folded out?
The transfer portal still is hard. However, I do have to give a ton of credit to the folks at 247 Sports who actually have done the work for me on that. And they have when you go to their recruiting rankings pages, they actually have, you can click recruiting or you can click overall, which includes the transfer portal. So that was kind of my baseline to incorporate that into my numbers. But again, even unless it's like Caleb Williams transferring, like it's probably not really going to move the needle a whole lot in terms of. I mean, you're talking literally tenths of a point, probably, if anything, unless it's just a huge impact guy that has a proven track record that I could kind of manually override the numbers and be like, okay, they're getting the guy from Alabama last year, Will Anderson. They're getting Will
Yeah, yeah.
Anderson. That then I would make a manual adjustment. But unless it's a guy like that, it's not going to move the needle.
And I guess I'll ask the same question. I would assume that this defensive rating for Ohio State is very heavily influenced by what I kind of just alluded to. That there's some guys who we haven't seen play yet: Sonny Styles, C.J. Hicks. You've already obviously the third-year edge rushers that were highly ranked. We know about them in J.T. Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer. But are those younger guys making an impact on this rating, as you see it? In just the fact that this defense has guys that are that highly ranked. Maybe it isn't. Maybe like you said before, that's more of the overall ranking that influences, right,
Yeah.
more than the offense or defense.
Yes, and like I said, for because I do the weighted ranking, because generally your third and fourth year guys are going to be more impactful. Your second year guys. So I will say there is a big jump in my weight assigned from your first year to your second year. Like freshmen, because freshmen so rarely have a major impact, I
Mm-hmm.
do kind of minimize that in terms of looking at the team talent score, because as we've seen, like when Marvin Harrison and those guys were freshmen, they're not playing, but they're impacting the talent. They could potentially have impacted the talent score. So I try to, I do want to include them because they are on the team and in theory could make an impact. But I think we've seen more often than not that impact is minimal.
All right, so that sets the stage. We're going to come back from this break and we're going to talk about what your numbers say about Ohio State and Michigan. Not just the season the Wolverines could have, but that specific game, because it came up with an interesting preseason result, I think. Stay here on Buckeye Talk.